super, super excited to be talking to Karen Thompson of Pregnancy Justice. Um, Especially right now, I feel like we we reached out to Karen very last minute. And I've been wanting to have you on forever, but it was like we need to have this conversation now. Like this is happening in a way that this chat needs to happen.
Mhm.
Do you want to tell people a little bit about you and pregnancy justice and the kind of work that you do? I feel like I talk about the organization enough that I hope people understand it, if they're readers of the newsletter, but for folks who might not.
Yeah, so Pregnancy Justice is a 25-year-old not-for-profit organization that works nationally to defend and advocate for the rights of pregnant people, and people who have pregnancy outcomes of all sorts, whether that
Yeah.
be an abortion, a stillbirth, or a miscarriage. We litigate. We do direct and strategic litigation, but we also have a thriving policy department who, as you know, legal stuff and policy
Yeah.
stuff are hand in glove, and a research team. So they're the ones who
Yeah.
track cases and who have provided reports, which are on our website,
Hmm.
that talk about pregnancy criminalization and show the patterns.
Yeah. How long have you been with pregnancy justice now? It's been a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, like a
I
year
mean,
and 4 months.
yeah. Well, because sometimes I
To
still think of
shorten
you, I'm like new, but like not really. Like over
not
a year to
yeah.
me, I
We
feel
have to
like
stop
in
saying
post
it.
row time is is a lot.
It's no longer an
Um,
excuse.
I mean,
But I
really.
do, let me just say that I do come to this space and this world
Mm,
of reproductive justice really sideways because I really
mm,
came in from a criminal defense, uh, kind of civil
yeah.
rights background. And so
Yeah.
what's interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into this today, is that
Yeah.
all of that stuff that I was
Mm,
doing before is still completely relevant to what's happening now and specifically within this space.
mm,
All of it is implicated. And
right.
so, yeah.
Right. No, that makes sense. How how has the work, do you think, with the organization changed since Dobbs? Has it? Because I know that you're dealing with a lot of the same cases that actually existed before Roe was overturned. I think that there's sort of this myth that, criminalization wasn't happening, that Roe protected from that. And so I'm curious how it's shifted for you all.
That's exactly right. It's not different, right? In the sense that the cases are not necessarily different. I think what is happening is the speed of
Mm,
how they're popping up. It's like the mushroom effect. And I think we're also just looking at different ways that it is kind of cloaking itself. Like it's
mm,
like the right wing and drag, right? So like we're always seeing um we've always seen fetal personhood. It's always been the thing, but
yeah.
the way that it is making itself known, like we have this whole new lane of forensic investigative genetic genealogy cases, which
Yes.
is basically like using 23andMe to accuse pregnant people who had a stillbirth of murder, right? So that
Yeah.
not new, but we're just seeing more tech
Right.
facilitating all of the criminalization.
Right.
It's tech informing the carceral responses.
Let's actually talk about tech for a second because there was a story. It's going to be in the newsletter tonight. It was broke by 404 Media about um, Texas cops using data from automated license plate readers across the country. They
Mhm.
looked at over 83,000 cameras to track an abortion patient, to try to find an abortion patient. And they looked at data from, as I said, over 83,000 cameras from around the country, even from pro choice states, because pro choice states don't have sort of like sufficient regulations on sharing data with anti abortion states and law enforcement in anti abortion states. Um, and something that in this article, a woman named Kate Bertosh, I think is how you pronounce her last name, from
Mhm.
Digital Defense Fund, said something really interesting about the tech. And she said, anti-abortion activists have been outside of clinics writing down license plate numbers for years, right? What has changed is now it's this like automated big tech company who is giving them this tactic that they've always had.
Yep, and this is again one of those directly transferable things, right? Because
Mm,
folks have been tracking using ALR readers
hmm.
forever in the criminal justice space, right? They've been using them to find people, to hunt them down, like immigration, all the things have been done this way, and people were like, "Oh, that's fine. We're good with cops doing it because it's those bad people over there." And I think what we're
Right.
now seeing is this network, this way that
Yeah.
law enforcement is really empowered right in this moment is always going to come home. It's always
Yeah.
going to be chickens coming home to roost. And so now we're
Yeah.
seeing it in effect. But yeah, it's like deeply disturbing that it's national, right?
Right.
Because like whether or not you want it, you're now implicit and you're working with people
Right.
um, to get this done. So
You're they're aiding in the investigation. And
yes,
what's interesting, I don't think I realized, and maybe you can shed some light on this, but I don't think I realized that these were private companies. Right? Like these are private companies basically giving information. And so like in this Texas case, and other civil liberties groups have warned about this, that you don't need warrants. Like you don't need warrants or court orders. They're just getting that information. In this case, all they had to do was input, what's your reason? And their reason was, woman had an abortion.
right. And right. So like when you say what happened post Dobbs, this is the thing. Like there are
Right.
no there's not even like a guardrail, there's no bumper. It's just
Right.
like pure unalloyed complete integration of law enforcement practice, private company, and equity, right? Because
Right.
we're in late stage
Yeah.
capitalism, so
Yeah.
it's also people making money off of selling your stuff to track you down, right? So it's like it's a toxic brew of bad
Yeah.
aggregate stuff.
What other sorts of like tech things might people not know about? I know, so there's like the license plate readers. What other data are you all concerned about or have you seen used?
Um, I mean, there's like data and then there's science. So I think
Mm,
obviously like what's going on with Miss Smith in Georgia is a little
yes.
bit it's more sciency, but I think the data there and it's something that we just started talking about. One of the things I think we need to look at is what's going on in those cases, which is basically human experimentation, right?
Mm,
And so I think that we need to start getting to those things too, right? Because there's some
yeah.
very clear rules, both state and federal,
Yeah.
about what you can do to live human
Mm.
subjects. And both what they're doing to this corpse, which, by the way, as you know better than anyone, how many cases have we seen of women getting charged with abusing a corpse? Is this not abuse of a corpse? Is this not abuse of a corpse?
It's
By any
unbelievable.
analysis, this is abusing a corpse,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
for folks who don't know, just in case, I'm sure, I feel confident that everyone who is here, has seen the story of Adriana Smith in Georgia, who is a woman, a young mother who was declared brain dead, and her body is being forcibly kept alive, by the hospital, who says that the state abortion ban is preventing them, from letting her go. And there's obviously been this huge, tremendous national backlash, as there should be, but I don't think it, I think probably for you and for folks who do this work, who understand the way that fetal personhood operates, it's like, of course, this was going to happen. But I think that so many people were really shocked by this story. Um, I'm just wondering if
which
you could talk about that, like a little bit about
yeah,
the fetal personhood and
yeah. I think there are a couple of things that are distressing. The first is that this is not the first, right? Like you have
yeah,
to go back 10 years to Marlise Munoz in Texas, who actually had an advance directive to say, or
right,
had made it clear what her wishes were, and those were ignored. And the
right.
same situation happened, and both Marlise, who was dead,
Hmm.
brain dead, and the fetus that her dead body was being used to incubate died. So
Right.
again, there's no interest of the child. There's no, this is the best thing. There's no like viability line, none of it. So I think it's important to know that, and that even before
Hmm.
that, there was another case out of
Mm,
DC, AC with her
hmm.
initials. So it's not new. It's just that we're seeing it again. What I think is
Right.
important, though, that I think is maybe falling a little bit through the cracks, is that Miss Smith went to get care
Mm,
the day before this all went down, right? She went
mhm.
because she was having a headache. She was a nurse. She knew something was not right. And as we've seen over and over in states across the country with these bans, the
Yeah.
worst maternal and fetal health care outcomes. she's a Black woman, and she's saying what her needs are. They are ignored. She is sent home with aspirin, and she has
Right.
blood clots in her brain, right? So it's like the life that is not of importance
Mhm.
is now the one that is being artificially Frankenstein to be
Mm.
an incubator for this baby. So I don't. I think I've gone far afield from the data
No.
question, but I think again, we're just seeing this aggregation of old, ugly things that are
Yeah.
all just kind of coming together into this really scary, toxic slurry.
Yeah. And can you mentioned advanced directives, and I know you all put out a really important and very, very helpful map of sort of what your rights are or lack of rights are in different states around advanced directives. Can you just explain that a little bit to
Yeah,
people?
absolutely. So, um, everyone has a right to say what you want to do for your end of life care, whether that's in
Mm.
your will, whether that's a power of attorney. You can say, "Don't resuscitate me, don't put me on anything, or do it only for a month," whatever.
Yeah.
You make those choices, unless you're pregnant, because then in 29 states, and we had to revise because Washington
Mm.
literally just passed a law this week, um, kind
Wow.
of reforming it. So yay,
Yeah.
yay
Great.
Washington. But there's still 29 states, not red, not blue, all over the place, that allow a hospital to completely ignore whatever those directives that you set out for yourself, if you're pregnant. And part of the reason is if there's a viable fetus, or if they can get a
Mm.
fetus to viability, then it's fine to ignore whatever you told people that you wanted to be done for your care.
Right.
So
And I want to, I we're gonna to talk about viability and the viability line, which you and I like have texted angrily about several times. But um, with advanced directives and what happens sort of tangibly to a
mhm,
family, like I think that's the thing I keep thinking about is what this looks like for a family. It's one thing to say what the law does, and then there's what is actually happening at a hospital to a family, right?
mhm.
And if that advance directive is not being honored and you have a loved one in the hospital, the idea of have like what do you even do? Like do you go fight in court for the you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
how it just seems so incredibly cruel. And anyone who's had a family member in the hospital or who's had to make decisions on behalf of a family member, it just seems insane.
And it is. I mean, in Miss Munoz's case, and we see these cases, you read them, you're a lawyer,
Yeah.
you're like, let me just do this thing. But there's some things that you just read, and you have to like get up and walk for a
Mm,
second, and I feel like her case is one of those because her husband says in one of the pleadings,
yeah.
I went to hold her hand and the bones broke, and I
Mm,
went to kiss her on the forehead and I could smell the smell of rot and death. And he was an EMT, so he knew what that smell was. And
yeah.
I'm like, who does that? Like, who does that to a family member? Who thinks that that is in any
Yeah.
way the way that things should be? Like, just as a human
Right.
being, like, why would you do that
Right.
to someone? And it's devastating. And I think this idea of viability
Hmm.
is what justifies it. It's what gets us here.
Right.
And sadly, I think it's like progressive people, or people who
Hmm.
are or like, we're here for reproductive rights. We want to make sure that there are no abortion bans. People are like handing the stuff over to allow it to flourish, to lead to things like this, and it's
Yeah.
really dangerous.
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about it. I think this is another thing where people probably know what we mean, but it might be useful to get into it a little bit about what viability means legally, because there is no it is a medically arbitrary standard. There is no actual medical viability line. Each pregnancy is different right? Like you
Mhm.
don't know. But legally viability was just invented, right? Like
whole
someone made it up.
whole cloth and invented. And literally, there's a quote in, I think, Casey, where
Hmm.
they're basically like, we had to have a viability line because otherwise how do we justify our legal holding? Right? Like, it's like they're very clear that it's not actually
Yeah.
about, it's not doing anything medically.
Yeah.
And the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists are like, there's no such thing as a viability line. Like, that's not how
Right.
we do things as obstetricians. But the arbitrary line that the kind of legal community set is any ability of a
Mhm.
fetus to survive outside the womb, right? So that might mean completely covered in tubes with eyes that are still fused
Right.
shut. Like that could mean all kinds of things. But that's, you know, we've seen that now creep. That's the thing, 'cause it'll never stay still. So it's just creeping backwards.
Yeah.
It's creeping backwards, and it's
Yes.
getting earlier and earlier and earlier because tech is allowing a heartbeat to continue earlier and earlier and earlier. And so
Right.
now that's the baseline, right?
Right.
But then it becomes the baseline for all sorts of criminalization, um, and it's justified by everybody in the conversation. So
Mm.
it's going to be a really hard thing to pull back from.
Right. No, it has become the norm. It is the norm language despite being completely arbitrary. And I have to say, like, I'm glad that you brought up quality of life and like what viable like to the anti-abortion movement who they do keep moving it back and saying, oh well, there's been cases of 21 weeks, 22, whatever it is. And I have to say, as someone who gave birth 3 months early and saw, and Layla, I was very lucky, was 98% going to be okay,
Hmm.
but still had to go through an incredible number of painful, terrible medical interventions that I would not wish on my worst enemy. And the idea that had something happened a few weeks earlier, like
Hmm.
not being able to make those decisions is unreal to me. And I remember when this happened, I had so many anti-abortion folks reach out and say, "Aren't you pro-life now? Aren't you pro-life now that you had this, 2-pound baby?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I am more pro-choice than
Than
ever,
ever.
more than ever." Um,
But can you like talk a little bit about that? I'm
yeah,
curious. Like, so what was your process? Like, when you were like, oh, okay, like viable fetus,
yeah.
right?
It was, I mean, for me, we felt so lucky that we were far enough along and that it was like, okay, if we just do a certain number of things, that she'll be okay, and that she would be healthy, most likely,
Hmm.
right? Like majority healthy. But she was in the hospital for 2 months, and there's only so much reassurance they can give you. And we were surrounded by parents who are in different circumstances, and who didn't know. And the connective tissue, I think, between all of us is that like we had choices. You have to sign something. She had a central line IV put in her at one point. And again,
Mm,
she's tiny.
mm,
You have to sign something to make sure that that's okay. You have to sign. You're a part of that process, and I can't imagine, it's such a horrible, difficult thing. And of course, like as the person who was pregnant, you're very ill, just getting over
mhm,
almost dying.
mhm,
To to have to make those decisions in the midst of that is already so difficult. And it was already so difficult, even having the most supportive care team imaginable. And
mm,
so I can't imagine, what this is doing to parents. And I know that we've seen a lot of this happen with the Born Alive bills that Republicans are trying to pass, where
right.
they are framing it as, oh, it's like post-birth abortion and leaving babies on the table to, no,
Right.
this is about, families making difficult, necessary decisions
Right.
for what is best for them.
Right. And I wanted to ask that because I think when we talk about viability and we talk about these questions, that is exactly what happens. I think people are like, but you want to have abortions after birth, and really, like you're really okay with killing babies, and it's like we have to talk about some realities that
Yeah.
are hard and not necessarily clear. And I think some of that is that, um, for some people a pregnancy is really wanted and some people
Mhm.
it's not, and it feels to
Mhm.
me like that's where the analysis ends.
Right.
Right, like it's like there's
Right.
those are the two lanes. um
Right.
and like some people have these outcomes they don't want and some people have the outcomes that they do want, but it's still this unitary person until they give
Mhm.
birth, right? And so I think
Right.
part of the failure, I think, in addition to like pushing the viability line, is not being
Mhm.
willing to talk about the different
Yeah.
feelings that people have.
Right. Right. And that you don't stop being a person when you're 24 weeks pregnant or 25 weeks pregnant. You're still a
Exactly.
person. You still have constitutional rights.
Exactly.
And the idea that you could interfere with that uh, is just unbelievable. What I say often and again as someone who has been through a very difficult pregnancy,
Mhm.
pregnancy is too complicated to legislate, like full stop. There is no legislation that can happen with pregnancy at all at any point where there is any sort of moral, ethical justification. Like that can never be moral or ethical to me. Like
Mhm.
I can't imagine a situation. But
We're yeah.
how do you think that this has become like so um ingrained in pro-choice language, right? Like I noticed someone asked in comments like when did this viability discussion
Mhm.
begin? And it was during Roe, right?
Road creates the
Yeah.
framework, right? But it's, there's a weird long evolution, and we just published a report. Sorry, keep
Yeah.
doing my little shout outs, but we just
No,
published
for
a report
sure.
on our website. So please check out the report because it gets really into the detail. But the
Mm,
really kind of short thumbnail is that things used to be about quickening, right? It started out
yeah.
with quickening. Like when the pregnant person felt movement, like that was the moment where the courts
Mhm.
were kind of like, oh, we can get involved. And then it turned into born alive, which for me is the correct thing. Like
Mhm.
when there is an actual independent human being who can live
Mhm.
fully independently from their parent, that's when all the things that are legal attach, because that's when a
Mhm.
human being is here for the courts to have
Mhm.
jurisdiction over.
Right.
But then it went from that to this kind of viability frame almost soon after. And soon it just became this creating a state ability to come into the womb earlier and
Mm,
earlier. And that walks, just to circle back, that walks directly
yeah.
hand in hand with tech, right? So
Right.
wherever the tech comes, that's when the state has more access to people's
Right.
bodies and to their choices. And so it's not
Right.
surprising that we see this evolution, but it comes from Roe, right? So when
Right.
people now, when we're having these conversations about like, let's get Roe back, no, we don't want Roe back.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
let's build something new that actually suits our purposes, and let's take this moment because they are burning the shit down. So let's figure out
Yeah.
how we're going to come back with something that's actually good. Like let's
Yeah.
take this as an opportunity. There's not a lot of happy things to talk about in these worlds, but one of them is to really be able to think about what
Yeah.
we want to do differently now. And
No,
what
that's
we want to
absolutely
do
right.
is not resurrect Roe.
Right. It just has never made sense to me. It feels so much like adopting a conservative framework, right? Where you're
Yes.
adopting this conservative framework of when is it okay for government interference rather than is it okay for government interference? And we know morally, ethically, no. And we know that voters don't want that either, right? Like I do think that people, and this is what I think I get so frustrated with Democrats about. Americans don't want that. Americans understand, people understand when you have a conversation with them, when you ask them polling questions that go beyond 15 weeks, 12 weeks, right? When you actually have a conversation with Americans, they understand how complicated this issue is and they
Mhm.
do not want government involvement at all. And there's just sort of no recognition of that,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah. And I think what's happened is that people say, well, it's a trade off. It's the thing that goes in the
mm,
negotiations. Like, instead of giving us a full abortion ban, give us a thing, but we'll give you viability. But all it is soft fetal personhood.
mm,
It's like a gentle
yeah.
way to like allow this. You're just saying, oh, well, we're just going to put a date on
Hmm.
when we get to be involved in your body, and like that is just
Right.
not helpful for the purpose that I think it was being meant for, which is to save access to abortion.
Right. And I would love to talk a little bit about how that ends up, how this viability line ends up coming up in criminalization, right? Like, what story was I thinking of? There was a Pennsylvania teenager a few months ago who was being investigated
Mhm,
for her pregnancy loss. She had buried the fetus, in her backyard. No laws about how to dispose of a fetus.
mhm.
But you know and this happens again and again with lots of these stories because they all follow a particular pattern when people are arrested for their pregnancy outcomes where how late they were in pregnancy is always mentioned, right?
Always.
or
Mhm,
or the perception of how late they were in
mhm.
pregnancy. Um, and if they're at a certain point, then now you're a criminal. Before you're having a miscarriage, now you're a criminal.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering if you could talk about that, about how you see that sort of come up in the cases that you all deal with.
Yeah, it's everything, right? Because it is the baseline for all
Yeah.
pregnancy criminalization is saying that there is a viable um, fetus which can be harmed, and
Mm,
so it's the which can be harmed clause that just starts
mm,
turning into exercise and starts turning into like eating soft cheeses and
right.
falling downstairs or getting shot, right?
That is
Suddenly,
a real thing. That is a real story for people who don't know.
someone gets charged with child abuse and I believe manslaughter
Yeah, it
after
was
they got shot with a viable fetus because
yeah,
they weren't taking adequate care of another child,
right.
right?
They were
And
in a
so
dangerous situation.
100%. And the thing that is really creeping me out right now, and
Mm.
I admit I dabble in a tinfoil hat every once in a while, but I don't,
We
I
love
think,
a tinfoil hat.
but I think we're also living in a time where the tinfoil hats are just getting not tinfoily anymore,
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think the thing that really terrifies me about the viability line and the current moment is that if you're saying I get to be involved in your viable pregnancy because there's another
Mm,
human whose rights need to be protected,
right.
then there are people like law enforcement and police officers who might have a duty to
Mm,
defend a life that they think is under attack. And so if we have cops tracing people's driver's licenses, if
yeah.
we have ICE and FBI people, um, literally chasing people into trees, as just happened in Martha's Vineyard, then where is that? Sorry, I just have to plug in my phone.
All good.
What do we think is going to happen
Right.
if police think that they have an obligation to defend a fetus? Like, do they get to
Right.
use deadly force to do so? And
Right.
those questions used to be like super on the hyperbolic fringe, and now I don't think they're so fringy. These
No.
worries and these concerns, I think that they're kind of proving themselves to actually merit some eyes and some worry.
100%. I mean, the fact that we have a they call themselves abortion abolitionists, these, these mostly male lobbyists who are drafting this legislation. They've had it introduced in 12 states that
Mm,
would punish abortion patients as murderers. That is their whole thing is you need to protect this fetus. They're being very clear that they're willing to, punish pregnant people, abortion patients with the death penalty. Why
yes,
do we think that they're going to wait for the state to do it? I don't have
exactly.
any doubts. Like, they are very dangerous people. And yeah. So, no, I'm right there with you
Yeah,
with the tinfoil hat.
it's terrifying. Like these are the things that I think should be keeping us up at night,
Yeah.
because the kind of quick, rapid, slippery slope is getting a little slipperier
Yeah.
every
It
day,
is.
and we'll see. I think as we keep seeing them, as we try to get into those spaces, and we try to think about
Yeah.
um, what you know fights can be had. I think we just have to
Mm,
be mindful of this very like unstable ground that is being seeded right now.
yeah. How do you think? I mean, have you had conversations with anyone who supports the viability line, or who sees it as like a reasonable trade-off? Like, what do you think the way to get through is? You know what I mean? Like, what's
You
the
know,
hurdle that we need to get over there?
it's a
I know that's a big
political.
question.
Well, I think it's a political hurdle. I think
Yeah.
it's in the same vein of like, you know what, 85-year-old senator, I think it might be time for you to step down. I think it's time for a new
Yeah.
generation of folks to be in leadership, and I think it also means that people have to think differently about these issues. And I
Mm,
think that includes, the kind of legacy repro
mhm,
orgs. Like I think
yeah.
there's a way that folks have been like, this is how we change things, this is how we do it. And
Yeah.
that is using the viability line. And so
Right.
again, we are being the times are demanding of us creativity and they're
Mm,
demanding that we adapt and evolve and do something new because
yeah.
The one kind of like silver lining I think of the right is that they don't have new ideas. Like they've been doing the same shit for 150 years.
Yeah.
Really, on like all in every basis. They just use tech
Yeah.
to do it a little
Right.
differently or do it faster, but we have new ideas, right? And I
Yeah.
just think that we need to start using them. And I think we have to
Mhm.
stop being afraid. Like we just
Yeah.
I'm just going to say this, but we just did. We work with Patient Forward, which is another really amazing organization
Yeah.
that is working on how to kind of open up a conversation and policy around later term abortions. And so we're
Mhm.
working with them, and we worked with them on this report because we wanted to get it out there. And we did a panel at NAF, and it was really interesting to me because the first question after this hour, which was talking about like
Yeah.
all of the criminalization, what happened to Marlies
Yeah.
Munoz, like all of it, the first question was basically, well, how do we do this work and not have people think that we're being mean?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I kind of don't. I think we've passed the mean Rubicon. Like, I think we need to
Yeah.
like start thinking about how to be mean and how to fight. And I think that's part of the problem. I just think that there's a
Yeah.
real kind of like genteel, this idea that we're still in a gentleman's agreement world, and
Right.
we're not.
Right.
We
No,
haven't.
it's the fear and it's the like the politics of like civility, and it's just over. Like that doesn't exist anymore. And it does feel like there is this sort of fear hurdle that people need to get over, that some, legislators need to get over with. They're gonna say I'm a baby killer.
Yep.
They say that anyway. They say
Yes.
that no matter what. They're gonna
Yep.
say I want abortions post-birth up until birth. They say that anyway. They say that no matter what. So
Exactly.
why are we, fighting using their framework? Why are we allowing them to frame the terms of the debate and the fight? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It
And
doesn't.
like,
And like I think really like powerful activism for the last 20 years. I just think about AIDS activism. Like when I,
mm,
moved to New York in the 90s, like I was like doing lesbian adventures, like work doing act up stuff. And like the tagline was re-recruit because at the
mm,
time they were like the gays are recruiting and it's like fuck, like bring
yeah,
it back. Like you've got to like
yeah,
bring it back in a way that undermines this non-power um
right,
that is driving our policy, and
yeah,
it's I know we don't live in a time of nuance. Like I know everything is like fast and black and white, but we have to force the nuance. We have to force these
yeah.
conversations because people are dying.
No, I think that's so important, and it's right. Barbara wants to hear about more about the creative new ideas that you're referring to. I'll just say something. I do think it's right that the anti-abortion movement has been just regurgitating the same shit over and over again, but they are not afraid to be disliked. They are
Exactly.
not afraid to throw random shit at the wall. Like when I look at what Students for Life is doing with this, like, oh, we're drinking abortions. Abortions are in the wastewater. Birth control is in your drinking water. Like it's all like the difference is we would be telling the truth, whatever creative thing we come up with. But they have a goal, and they are doing what it takes to get things done, and they are out there, and they're not worried about fiery press releases, and they're not worried about someone calling them kooks. They're just doing the work.
And I mean, again, let's look at what they're doing. Like they're actually going into schools and being like, no, we're going to tell you to teach in
Yeah.
science classes, not sex. I think you
Yes,
reported on this.
I did.
Like it's not even in a sex ed class where a parent can be like, not my kid. Like it's in science class. You're
Mhm.
teaching these principles. These are people who are introducing bills trying to get the death penalty to people who've
Mhm.
had abortions. So like there's nothing normal about this. And you know, another thing that I think we need to do is understand that we are dealing with people who are actually like monsters. There's a
Yeah.
monstrous abomination
Yeah.
quality to the things that we are seeing, and
100%.
that has to be named. I think we need to say what is being done here is an abomination, and what
Yeah.
we are doing is not like we are actually look, if people want to have babies, if they literally are like, this is my dream, I want to be a mother, they're usually doing it because they are believing in a world that they want to bring this child into, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
at the core of it, there's something that is like forward thinking and
Yeah.
hopeful about that, right? So you want to create the world that you want to bring this child into. And that is something to stand on,
Yeah.
right? Like, why are we running away from that? That is what every baby should be having, a world that they can live in and be
Yeah.
habitable. And like, that is not what these people are doing. They're like making
That's right.
things worse for everybody. They're not making it possible to make those choices for yourself and your
Mhm.
family or to make the
Right.
world possible that you want to make possible. So,
Right.
yeah. And these are very
No, it's so
abstract. And I know
important.
if someone has a very specific
No.
question about our theory, or like how we're fighting back, I think it's not clean. So I think, sometimes we are just defending. We're just trying to get information to people who need the information to make sure someone's not going to jail for 20 years for murdering
Mhm.
a baby when they had a stillborn, right?
Yeah.
So some of it need is still being cooked, but I just think before you can cook, you have to get the ingredients. And I think some of what we're seeing with the
Mm.
policy and what's going down right now, these ingredients are rancid. So it's
Yeah.
part of it is just trying to think through what new ways we can be to even get for moving ourselves
Yeah.
forward.
I'm honestly so glad to hear you talk about the anti-abortion movement as an abomination and as like I really do think that we don't lean into that enough. We talk about them or like sort of like the mainstream conversation about antis is they're weird, right? They're
Mhm.
creepy, they're misogynist, all of which are true, right? But like they it is monstrous. What is happening to Adriana Smith in Georgia is monstrous. When I think about Samantha Cassiano in Texas vomiting on the stand while talking about being forced to watch her daughter take painful last breaths because she was forced to carry a non-viable pregnancy to term,
Mm,
that is monstrous. That
mm,
that is not pro-life. There is nothing pro-family about that. The things that they want pregnant people to do and this country to tolerate
mhm.
are just completely antithetical to our values, right? And
Absolutely.
we don't talk about that enough. Like we've ceded values to them. We've ceded, the idea of family to them. And while and I've written this before, but like we should be out there calling them murderers. Like it absolutely blows my mind that after years of this movement, calling, pro-choice legislators, calling pro-choice groups, baby killers, murderers, you have actual people dying. You have the maternal and infant mortality rate going up.
Yes.
And like they're killing people. It's
Yeah.
very
And
clear.
at the same time as these same people who are like rights of the child, interests of the child, are changing like state laws so that like teenagers and 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds have to
That's
work
right.
on factory floors. Like some kid in Pennsylvania, some 15-year-old was just like fell into a wood chipper. Like, don't give me any interest of the child. Don't give me any
Right.
interest of the child and have that and be doing that. Don't give me interest of the child and force a 12-year-old to give birth to her rapist baby. Don't give me best interest of the child when nothing you are doing in the world is in the best interest of the child. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely about naming what we are seeing and naming what they are doing. And
Hmm.
it is, again, it's not new. It's not new.
Right.
Like all of this stuff has been played out like on Black women's bodies in particular. Like J. Miriam Sims was
Mm.
experimenting with gynecological practices with no anesthesia or anything on Black women's bodies to develop the whole entire
Right.
kind of foundation of modern
Yeah.
obstetric practice, right? And I
Yeah.
just read today that like after how long that they're finally are like, oh, you know what? Maybe we should give women who are getting IUDs implanted some like anesthesia.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good idea, and it's
Maybe.
just like, and what did it take? It took a lot of people taking TikToks of what it looked like the pain that they're experiencing to get people to understand that maybe this is not a great
Right.
way to go. But I think having eyes on and having people lift up their voices
Yeah.
about this is it's necessary, but we have to name it. We have to name it or we
Right.
can't change it.
No, it's so important. I want to make
Sorry.
sure if folks want to start putting questions in the comments, feel free. We'll have a couple minutes for questions. But I did want to ask Karen about the anti-abortion movement's response to some of these stories, which I have just found fascinating and really telling because with Adriana Smith, for example, you have all of these anti-abortion groups. I mean, there's been some who've been like, yeah, this is what the law was meant to do, and at least they're being honest about it. But then the vast majority are not. They're trying to distance themselves, right? Like Susan B. Anthony, Pro Life America, has not said a word. So,
Mm,
like, do you think that there is an understanding that they are just completely turning off voters? Like, do you think that they get that? Do you think that they are gonna publicly try to move away from it at all?
move away
Or
from
from the
supporting
horrors?
it.
Yeah, move away from the horrors, distance themselves. Um, yeah. Like, do
I
you
think
think they get it, you know?
I think they do, but the thing is, like, now they're all in it together, right?
Mm,
Like, they're that's the thing. Like, Mary Ziegler, I think, talks about
mhm.
this in her new book, which is just that, like, again, what was like crazy fringe, like where like the Susan B. Anthony people of the world would be like, oh,
Yeah,
we're not doing this like death penalty thing.
yeah.
Well, now they're all like on that bus. They're all in the clown car together.
They
So
really are. They really, and it's so funny because they'll say publicly that they're not, which is not true. But then you have someone, like the president of Students for Life, who will sort of like admit, like I think she gave a quote or she said something in a podcast that was something to the effect of like, there's like three groups in the anti-abortion movement. One who absolutely doesn't want to punish women, a group that does, and then there's where most of us are, which is that we want like we know that we need to wait for the culture to change in order to be public about punishing abortion
hmm.
patients, right? Like that they're trying to change the culture for this to be okay. And so in that
Oh,
way they are
that's
all on
interesting
board.
because what are the cultural changes that you think get you there? Like,
Right.
oh, what needs to change for people to be like, oh yeah, I'm good with a dead body being kept alive to like incubate a fetus? What
Right.
think about that? Like, think about what they're actually asking for the culture to become. Like,
Yeah.
people are like, oh, this is so Handmaid's Tale. This is so Handmaid's Tale. But I didn't actually realize there was an episode
There
of The
is. I
Handmaid's Tale
know.
about this.
I know.
Like, look, we're there. We are there. There is like we are in these places. We are in this moment. And so we like the only way for us to get out of this moment is to not like I know we keep saying don't normalize it, but like really for real, like
Yeah.
we have to name what is going on and what these people are doing
Yeah.
and not
No,
let them run away
absolutely.
from it. Not let them run away.
Exactly. Don't let them run away. Lauren has a question about advanced directives. Do you think there's any room for improvement there? For example, outreach to OBGYNs, new guidelines or regulations, ensuring pregnant women have that information, or is it just changing the law in more states?
Sadly, it's just changing the law, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
really the doctors are doing what they're told. Their doctors are doing
Yeah.
what has been laid out in these legal documents. But the problem is the legislatures are passing these pregnancy exceptions to just kind of take out the legal power of the document, this kind of
Right.
sacred will document. They're just saying, nope, that just doesn't apply to pregnant people. So a lot of it also is just people calling their electeds
Yeah.
and saying, you need to change this law. We see what's going down in Georgia. We're not me today.
Yeah.
Sorry, that is not going to
Yeah.
happen. And
Yeah.
get them to start like thinking on that and starting to do the policy changes that'll make this unacceptable. Because again, what is
Yeah.
the culture that they're trying to like make this okay in? So we got to start
Right.
pushing back.
Right. Well, I think part of the culture, like what they're looking to do, and this is why I'm so grateful for the work that you all are doing, is there's a reason, obviously, and I think we all know this, that they are targeting the most marginalized groups, that they target pregnant people who are accused of using substances, that they're looking for who they hope will be the least sympathetic people to try these laws out on,
Yep.
and change the culture that way. And if they lean, the misogyny is there. They know that this is a misogynist country, and if they can lean into that and make people feel like, ugh, women, pregnant people, they are just like itching for a chance to like get pregnant, wait until 9 months, and then have, they are really leaning into that disdain.
100%. And it's like shame is like the most powerful tool in the entire
Hmm.
world. So if they're shaming folks who are using while they're pregnant, and if and as always, this is always a question of economic
Yeah.
power, right? So
Yeah.
any like working class people are always going to be under deeper surveillance for whatever reason and are always going to be assumed to be bad parents
Yeah.
just because of their economic situation. So like
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really it's purposeful. It's
Right.
purposeful. And so like
It's
I think part of
purposeful.
why I think it's so important that we are able to be in the space is because who people don't want to go there. They don't want to
Yeah.
go there. And again, this goes back to like this goes for what we're also doing for folks who, naming themselves as progressive
Mhm.
repro people. But like if
Yeah.
you are going to say there's some good, it's like there are good people, they're good abortions, and then there are
Right.
people who have bad abortions, or if there's like, good behavior during pregnancy and bad behavior during pregnancy, people are
Yeah.
contributing to that, right? So, par-
100%.
yeah, we have to name that too.
Colleen wants to know, does Adriana's family have any organizations supporting them right now? Maybe I'm sure people are wondering how they can support Adriana's family. I know that there's a GoFundMe, and I'm happy to put a link to that when I send this video out. But yeah, is there anything else, even if it's not organizations, like what do you think is the best way to support Adriana Smith's family, or families of people in general who are being impacted by these laws, right?
Yeah, I think the Smiths situation is a little complicated because I think we just don't know
Yeah,
exactly what it is that the family wants, or
yeah,
how they want to proceed. And I think that there might be some different points of view within the family. So
yeah,
I don't want to speak for what was going down with them, but they do have a GoFundMe, and regardless of what happens in this situation, they are going to be socked with some really intense medical bills. And so I think
yeah,
giving them that fiscal support would be great. Also in Georgia, amazing, amazing organizations. And I cannot say this any
yeah.
louder. There are people who've been doing this work for ages. They've been doing it in the environments that we're seeing, and they know the game,
Hmm.
right? So support the people who've been doing the things so that we can learn how to do the things everywhere else. So Sister Song,
Yeah,
um, Ancient Song. There's some really wonderful repro orgs in
yeah,
Georgia that are doing this work, and I
yeah.
highly
Feminist
recommend everybody.
Center. I forget the
Feminist
full.
Center,
Yeah,
Krista
yeah,
Baker there. There are some really wonderful folks doing it in Alabama, Yellowhammer Fund.
yeah,
Um, there do do a little Googling, like use your
yeah,
fingers on that and support the people who are doing it because they were the ones raising the alarm for Miss Smith, and we
yeah.
are indebted.
Absolutely.
We're indebted to their knowledge and their work.
Absolutely. And Barbara mentions, and I think that this is right, is one action we can all take is discuss with our loved ones what we would want in this situation, and also just bringing this stuff up to people in general. I really think that conservatives and the anti-abortion movement are depending on either one, people being gaslit into believing this is not really happening, this is not really bad, those stories are fake. I have heard from so many people who are like, I tried to talk to my family member, they say that's fake, it's fake news. Or overwhelming people so badly that they're just shutting down, that it's like, I can't handle this, I can't talk about this is horrible, this is awful,
Yes.
this is horrible, I can't let this in to my to my psyche, which I understand, but there has to be a way that we can have these conversations and talk about the reality of what's happening, to get people engaged.
Yeah, because being numb is a trauma response, right? Like I don't
Mm,
want anyone to be like judging themselves about how they're responding in this moment because I think,
yeah,
the human body was not equipped to be bombarded 24/7 with horrifying things. So like if you're
yeah,
numbing out a little bit, that is a trauma response. So like noting that it's a trauma response is also helpful. But I think
yeah,
we have to be talking to each other, like even if it's these lives or like getting some
yeah,
face to face time, getting in community with people, and
mm,
yes, like talking to your family. You know what? If you can't convince them, you can't convince them, but you know what you
yeah,
can do? You can bring cookies to the next potluck where you're talking about how to call your senators and write letters about
yeah,
policy change, right? So I
yeah,
think you, in this moment, you got to find your lane. You got to find your lane. And that lane literally might be I just bring cookies to the meeting, right? Your lane
yeah,
might be I set up the chairs at the meeting, or your lane is I'm going to get arrested and tie myself to a tree. Whatever it
yeah,
is, we just have to find our lane, because it's when we get information in the ways that we can that we're able
yeah.
to do what we need to do.
Absolutely. For people who want to support pregnancy justice and the work that you're doing, what
Mhm.
can they do? What should they be paying attention to? Things that are upcoming for you all.
Yeah, we are doing a lot of reports. Like our goal was to release one a year after jobs,
Mm,
so people could really see what was happening with pregnancy criminalization. And what we know is that they've been skyrocketing. The arrests,
mm-hmm,
everything has been really ramping up. So if that's something that you're interested in, just like knowing numbers, knowing facts, knowing
mm-hmm.
the data, we've got data. So please visit us there. Obviously, in this time, every not for profit is in a crunch financially. So please, if
Yeah.
you are able to, please support us that way. But we are filing cases. We have current federal civil litigation in Alabama um,
Mm,
on behalf of a woman who was forced to labor on a jail shower floor for 14 hours unassisted, and then had COs pick up the baby while it was still attached to her with an umbilical cord and take pictures, right? So we have horrors that are happening that we're working through the system to
mm-hmm,
get some accountability, but those are slow processes.
mm,
So if you're interested in the legal questions, follow us. If you're not really interested, but you just want to know
yeah.
what's going on, follow us. But your
Yeah.
support, our support for us is your eyes. And if you can financially support us.
That's amazing. I think that everyone watching and hopefully anyone who reads the newsletter knows that I think that you all are just like the preeminent group that is doing the most like proactive, cutting edge important work. So for folks who are watching, if you don't already follow Pregnancy Justice, please follow them. Please support them. They're doing such incredibly important work. Karen, you are doing such incredibly important work. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful for everything that you're doing. I know that this is it's so difficult, and I'm just so grateful that you get up every day and do this work for all of us.
Well, same. Yeah, you know how hard I stand. So I feel like it's just nice that we're like they're people we're doing it together, like, and
Yeah.
that goes for like everyone, that goes for if when how, that goes for all the folks who are out here on the streets trying to get some stuff done.
Yep.
And so the good news is I think everyone is rising,
Yeah.
and I just hope that we can keep rising together.
Me
So
too. Karen, thank you so much
thank
for
you.
joining. I'm going to make sure everyone, when I send this out, I'll include all of the links where they can find you, where they can find Pregnancy Justice. And let's do it again. Let's check in
All
soon,
right.
and hopefully we'll have some better news. Just as fiery, but maybe better.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Bye.